Look at number 2. Referring later, below, the following, etc. Over the page. Referring to another work. Keep going, we're almost at the end. Related or unrelated, when you want to show connections or relevance or importance. Showing and proving, that's a big one for argument. Showing and proving to show that something is true. Show that something is likely. Next section, words about study and research. Number of verbs there. We're on study and research. It's got WH86 at the top. Research, investigate, examine, evaluate, analyse, etc. And then the nouns for that. And over the page, lucky last. Subjects and topics. And here we have, concerning, regarding, with regard to, deal with, be concerned with, focus on. We were talking about this the other day, James. These ones. Words meaning subject. Subject, topic, theme, issues, question, important, matter, da, da, da. Yeah, so you can see there's a lot there. And really the only way you're going to get to know that is work with it, isn't it, and use it. One way I suggest you use it is you have a topic, like say you're writing your draft now. Think to yourself, just get to know those headings. You might even like to write them as a separate list, maybe here, just all of those there. And just before you write anything, you just think, what are the 3 or 4 main things I'm wanting to do, main functions? I want to prove something, I want to disagree, I want to write about the disadvantages of that, and I want strong concluding statements. So those 4 sections, go and have a read of them before, and kind of warm yourself up, and you get all these phrases going around in your head, and you know most of these, most, not all, but most. You just kind of enliven them again, and they'll be buzzing around in your head. Okay, then put it to the side, and just write. You will have activated that stuff, it will come more readily. You could stop and have a quick look, but I tend to think first drafts, you just write. But if you've warmed yourself up, you're more likely to drop a few of these new ones in there. Or you could even in advance say, look, that phrase is the one I want for my conclusion, and this is what I want to express that cause and effect, and actually even target and select it before you do your draft. When you pick up another writing exercise we do, it might be, it might be a recount. And you just want to tell me, what really important thing happened on the weekend. Then you go to a section of importance. That's the thing you're going to use. So you read that before you write, There'll be different, each bit of writing, of course, depending on the genre and the topic, you're going to use different elements, aren't you? Different functions. And you can't read it all before you write. So, pick your top 3 or 4 kind of purposes and functions. Get yourself in there, read it, re-familiarise yourself with it, and then write. And I think as you do that with our different writing pieces and other stuff, you use it generally as a writing resource for other writing as well that you do outside of the course. You get very familiar with it, and I think that's the best way you get to learn this, by just kind of using it like that. So as I say, have it with you certainly in your assessment time. That's absolutely, you can use all these sorts of things in your final assessment.
Next term.
Next term.
Are you sure we can use it?
All right, any comments, questions or whatever about that?
No, can I make it clear for me? I will follow this pattern, cause and effect, okay?
Which one? Cause and effect?
Yeah, cause and effect. Is it, which is mean, when I write my...
Which means?
Which means, not which is.
Yeah, that's right.
Which means.
Yeah.
I have to follow, number 1, to cause something to happen. And number 2, ways of saying that something is caused by another thing. Is it step by step like that? Follow the...
No, you wouldn't necessarily use it in that order. It depends what you're writing. You're writing about Great Barrier Reef, don't use it like that. It's not No, it's like whatever and whenever you need a particular word, you go in and look at a particular section. Yeah.
Just select what.
Select what you need for that particular sentence. Sure. Yeah.
Or that paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments about that? All right. I hope that becomes a familiar resource for you. You could put it under your pillow at night time, sleep on it. Goes in. You could hope. Only if you read it for 20 minutes every night before you put it under the pillow, then it works. Let's do a bit of grammar while we're thinking kind of grammatically. Articles. Now I've got this piece here, and I reckon that's either Arabic or Persian, I can't tell. Somebody's written something already. Is that Kulthum or Mali or somebody, or Hannah? Somebody's written, go to the module meaning Moodle. Is that yours, Hannah? No? No? Right, then is it Persian? Give it to Marley, see what she thinks. Is that yours, Marley? Right, there you go.
Oh, I was just looking for it.
Yeah. Well, that's the clue, isn't it? If it's got Arabic script but it's not Arabic, then it's got to be Persian. Okay. I don't know, for some reason I had it. All right, we have covered the first two conditions of using the definite article. Special noun, special adjective. We're going to keep moving. Let's look at the next three. And the first one is generic. Generics are when we talk about the whole class of something, a whole category. Let's have a look at some examples. So, the definite article is sometimes used generically to indicate that a countable noun or noun phrase has to be counted. Refers to an entire type of something. In such usage, this is important, the noun or noun phrase is always in the singular. Can you underline that? Because that's how you can tell if it's generic or not. Is draw one there. Let me look at this one. That one. On articles, grammar. We're at the top of the page there. Yeah, so it's always got to be in the singular, and if you see a the and a plural, it's not going to be generic. It's always singular. So here's an example. For simplicity and efficiency, the Hawker Siddeley Harrier is one of the best present day VTOL aircraft. So they're talking about a particular aircraft. Here is the brand. We often do this with brands. The Hawker Siddeley Harrier. Can you see how there's a the? Now if we make it simpler, and we'll think of everyday products like the iPhone 6, yeah? The Honda Civic X1, or some brand of car or technology or anything. Or animals, species. The koala is endangered. The wombat, or even you can modify it. The South Australian wombat is rapidly disappearing. Now you don't mean one wombat, do you? You mean one type. So it's when you're talking about, it's unique, there's only one, say, type of South Australian wombat, right? You use the. As they say here, the author of this passage is referring not to a single plane, but to a single type of plane. Since there is only one such type of plane, wombat, or iPhone, the reference is unique. Other examples, they're very old. The IBM 3600, God, when was that? 1980 something. The Polaroid one step, my God, pre-digital camera. Okay, now they do say here, it is possible to use a noun or noun phrase generically without using the definite article. One can say hawker siddeley harriers, or a hawker siddeley harrier to refer to the entire type, just as you can say the hawker siddeley harrier. So let's take a simpler example. You can say wombats are disappearing. The wombat is disappearing. Okay? A wombat is disappearing, not really. That means a single wombat. No. But so, you know, the usual common one is the plural. It's easiest to use just the plural form. Wombats are disappearing. You can use generics. They're fine for animals and things. Don't use them for people. So if we're starting to talk about groups of people, like retail workers are underpaid. The retail worker is underpaid. That sounds kind of weird. It sounds like you're talking about an animal or a species. Because you see the examples here? They're about like brands of things or species. So we don't use this method about people or groups of people very much. So look, the easiest way to talk generically about everything and be safe is just use the plural. Koalas never drink water. Wombats are disappearing. Retail workers are underpaid. Yeah, you use your plurals like that with no article, you'll be safe. It'll sound fine every time. That is your safest and best method. And notice, when I'm talking generally about wombats, koalas, and retail workers, I use plurals, don't I? Don't forget, it's got to be plural, and it has no article. That is the best and easiest way of talking generically. However, given that this chapter is all about how to use the, they're pointing out that one reason for the is generic. But I'm just going off to the side of this and just giving you a writing tip, which is, you want to talk generically and generally about things, the best way is not this way. The best way is, the safest way is just to use plurals. Wombats, koalas, iPhone 6s, retail workers. Got the idea? Okay. So that's our rule on generics. Previous mention, I think this will be the most familiar rule to you. Often a writer will refer more than once to the same object or concept. In such cases, the definite article is used with each mention after the first. So, I met a fella on Curry Street, a fella. The guy said to me, where is the English office? I told the man that it was on the second floor. Now notice that. A fella, the guy, the man. Now it doesn't have to be the same word. I don't have to say fella, 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 or man, man, man. I'm using different words, aren't I? And I'm still referring to the same thing, the same person. So the first time you use a. But what we call subsequent mentions, doesn't matter if you use a different word, if it's referring to the same person or thing, and you're mentioning them a second or third or fourth or fifth time, it's the. So I'm sure you've learned that basic rule already, but I just want to point out in this chapter, this little section points out what I've just said, that you don't necessarily need to use exactly the same word. It's what we call the referent. It's the thing that you're referring to that is key. If that's repeated again, that referent is repeated, you need a the. So, look, you already know that one, so I'm not going to go through the first example. I want to just go through the second example up here, where it demonstrates in a slightly more complex way my example of a fella, the guy, the man. Let's look at how it's done in a technical manual. The simplest approach, I'm just reading the quotation. Notice this quotation, how it's set out. Here's a little thing for your essay. That has more than 30 words. So here's the rule. If your quotation is more than 30 words, you can't just put quotation marks around it. In fact, you're not allowed to. No quotation marks. Have a look at it. No quotation marks. You reduce the font size by 1 point, 1 or 2. Yeah. You separate it with a return, like a new paragraph, and you indent it. The margin, the line on the left, you push it in 1 tab space. That's what you must do with words over, with quotations over 30 words. That's the magic mark. There is a particular figure, 30 words. You write 29, you don't do it. You write 30, you do. I'll be counting.
Again, if I make.
If you have a quote,
If I have a quote from statistics, I have to account how many words by word account.
probably if you go, if you're going to use statistics, it's probably going to be pretty short, isn't it? You're going to say 97% of new migrants or something. Pretty short. But if you have a whole quote of like an idea like that, it's over, for whatever reason, it's over 30 words. That's what you do. 3 things: no quotation marks, font size decrease, and you indent it. Indent means you push it in. See how it's not lined up with the rest of the text? You push in. 4th thing, actually, you make sure you have returns, so it's like a new paragraph. Why do you do that? Because if you didn't do that, say you have quotation marks at the end, and it's the same font size, you can be reading, and the reader just for a second thinks, gee, this is a long quote, am I actually at the end of the quotation? Or, you know, is it the writer of the whole thing who's now speaking, or have I got to the end? And it might be a really long quotation, and they're kind of wondering, and finally they see the last little quotation marks, and they think, oh, right, that was just that quotation. But, you know, that ambiguity, like, am I reading the original writer, or am I still reading the quote? They're sometimes wondering until they see that last little quotation mark. Now, if you do that, that problem disappears, doesn't it? The reader knows when they're in the middle of that, they know I'm in the middle of a quotation. I'm not, you know, lost and wondering where I am. So there's a purpose to all these little fussy rules. Okay, let's have a look at the quotation. The simplest approach, this is about how you heat your house naturally in winter time, in summertime. The simplest approach to passive space heating is through direct gain of solar radiation by means of a south-facing expanse of glass. So this is written for the northern hemisphere. This approach works best when the south window area is double glazed and when the building has considerable thermal mass in the form of concrete floors and masonry walls insulated on the outside. What results is, in effect, a live-in solar collector thermal storage unit. If the south-facing window area is vertical, seasonal temperature control is basically automatic. Now, you reverse that for Australia, don't you? There it is, we have it right there. Look next to Hannah and Marley. Look at the floor. There's the sun coming in winter, isn't it? That's what they're talking about. You've got your north-facing vertical glass, and in winter the sun is low, comes in, heats up the floor. This room is, you know, maybe a degree hotter than it would naturally be. Yeah. So that's all they're talking about there. And, you know, they're using the opposite because it's the northern hemisphere. But the grammar point here is, look at the next bit. It's the, isn't it? Now, the first time it's mentioned, a south-facing expanse of glass. It's a bit of glass that faces south. First time it's mentioned, a. Next time, the south window area. Notice it's not the same words, is it? They don't say a south-facing expanse of glass again. They're using different words. But it's the. And the last case, the south-facing window area, slightly different from number 2, still the. So the point is, a more realistic example than the one I gave. You use synonyms, but the referent, the thing it's referred to, is still the same. Therefore, the.
Probably for Australia it's mostly north.
That's right, exactly. And that's north here, yeah. All right, so there's number 4, previous mention. Number 5, modifiers following the noun. This is post-modification. Often a writer will designate, like will signify, make, a referent unique by attaching one or more modifying phrases to a noun. For example, consider the word growth. By itself, it doesn't have a unique referent. There are lots of different kinds of growth, aren't there? Growth of my carrots in the backyard, growth of your hair, growth of the Australian economy, lots of growths. But if the writer adds appropriate modifiers to it, its meaning can be narrowed, and that's the key. You narrow something down to a unique referent. The growth, and here's the post-modification, of the American garment industry in the mid-19th century, we are really modifying that a lot, now was made possible by Isaac Singer's improvement of the sewing machine. So now the word growth refers to a specific growth, and thus requires the definite article the. So the key is that we've modified it down to only one kind of growth. And if you've done that and you made it unique, then we just follow the rule. It's unique, therefore the. This often happens with post-modification. Sometimes it happens with pre-modification. You can put words in front of nouns that sometimes do the same thing. But mainly with post-modification. And mainly, let's have a look at the usual structures. It says here that this use of the definite article seems to occur most often when a noun is followed immediately by an of phrase. Theory, like growth, can have lots of different kinds. It's not going to be the. But the theory of relativity, only one. Construction of the construction of Aswan Dam, only one such process. Principles, many principles, moral principles, physical principles. The principles of thermodynamics, only one set of such principles. Okay, so we often see this with the of structure. The cost of producing nuclear energy. The invention of the electric light bulb. You know, it's narrowing down all possible inventions, isn't it, to only one kind of invention. Notice that phrasal verb I'm using. It narrows it down. So from all possible inventions, it narrows it down to one, the invention of the electric light bulb. It also occurs with other types of following modifiers, including relative clauses. So you'll often see relative pronouns, but not always. At the time the Mariner 9 spacecraft began its Martian orbit in November 1971, an intense planet-wide dust storm was in progress. The infrared spectroscopy experiment, which was carried on the spacecraft, obtained information on the thermal structure of the atmosphere both during and after the storm. So descriptions of what's going on this spacecraft. Let's look at the word time. In the first sentence, the noun time refers not just to any time, but rather to a single specific time. At the time, the Mariner 9 spacecraft began its Martian orbit in November 1971. That's a relative clause. It's like, look, we could put in, at the time that. Yeah. Yeah, but at the time that, that is missing in English. In certain circumstances, you can leave it out. So don't look for your relative pronoun. It's the relative clause that's key. Sometimes you can not use your relative pronoun to write a relative clause, if that makes sense. So that relative clause there is narrowing down all possible times to one time. Because of its unique reference, the definite article is used. Similarly, in sentence 2, the infrared spectroscopy experiment, well, there are many of those around the world, but here, which, there is the relative pronoun, which was carried on the spacecraft. Yeah, there was only one that was carried on the spacecraft. And so that which was carried on the spacecraft modifies it, the experiment, to the point there's only one. Notice how the pre-modifiers, the adjectives before the word experiment, don't narrow it down. The infrared spectroscopy experiment. There are many of those experiments, such experiment materials around the world. It hasn't narrowed it down to only one, has it? But as soon as you say the one that was carried on the spacecraft, now we're down to one, and therefore we put the. So post-modification often does this. Your question you have to ask yourself is, I'm writing a noun and I'm modifying it with an of structure, or a which, or a that, or a relative clause. Have I narrowed it down, through that modification, have I narrowed it down to only one thing? If you have, it's unique and it gets a the. Right? And that can be a hard question to answer sometimes. If you're not sure, then just be like the gambler who goes into the casino, you know. I would say that this structure something of something, now the cost of electricity, the theory of relativity, 95% chance, probably more, 98%, I don't know, it would have a the. If you put your money, you put your $50 on that every time, just write the, 98% of the time you'll be right, you'll be a millionaire within days. All right? Sometimes you have an But then really the times you have is usually when it's a member of something, a student of TAFE. Yeah? I'm a member of the union. It's like when you're a member of a set. That's when you have here. There are very few times, apart from that, when you have here, it's usually the. Overwhelmingly, it's the. Let's discover how this works in practice. We've got 3 new rules. Here's our next exercise. You have to look at this and look at the definite articles that are being put in here because of these 3 reasons. Generics, post-modification, previous mention. Yeah. I'll read it through and I'm going to hand over to you to attack this, just like we did with special nouns and special adjectives. Remember, we were trying to find the definite articles that we used for that because of that reason. Forget those now. Don't think about special nouns or special adjectives. We're just thinking about previous mention, generics, post-modification. An introduction to the physics and physiology of acceleration. Physiology, like the study of bodily processes. In the days of the frail means very weak, canvas-covered aircraft, which could not take stresses easily tolerated by the human body, acceleration was not much of a problem. So early days of flight, these craft were very slow. Acceleration on the human body wasn't a big issue because the aircraft were weak, humans were relatively strong. Today, different situation. Aircraft of much stronger construction travel at sonic and supersonic speeds. Sonic, speed of sound. Supersonic, faster than sound. And thus can impose tremendous forces for appreciable, many significant, periods of time on the now relatively frail human occupant. So the situation's being reversed. Now you've got this huge, powerful aircraft and this relatively weak human, and a sudden turn at 1,000 kilometres an hour can really impose huge forces on the human occupant in the plane. Since aviation meaning flight, medicine, has as yet little understanding of these important forces, a study of the fundamental principles involved in the physiology of acceleration is needed. So they're saying, medicine associated with flight, It's doesn't understand this, so we need to have a look at the fundamental principles of acceleration on the human body. What does it do to the body? Such a study should proceed through the following stages. 1. The history of acceleration and its relation to aviation medicine should be described. 2. The physiological effects and the clinical response to such forces, meaning what does the doctor do about it, should be understood by the flight surgeon. The flight surgeon is like a doctor